It's a very powerful thing when the kids know that the school and their parents are working together. And when one side or the other is struggling, the kids feel it, right? So it's very important that that connection between home and school is there. And that, like you said, Andrew, that if there is a need on the school side or the parent side, that there's those conversations so that we can help each other.
Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arnaud, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
All right, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. We have a special guest with us today, and his name is Vince Galea. I've known Vince personally for years. I'm not even going to count back how many years, but we were at a school board together years ago before I left, and we met. I don't even remember how we met. I think you were in spec ed at the time, doing lots of programs, and I was like, man, this guy is enthusiastic. Right. And had to connect with you. And then from there, we've just stayed connected. And Vince Galea is now a principal. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Vince, and then you'll hear his voice, I promise. So Vince Galea is an Ontario educator and school principal with 19 years of experience in education across two of the largest school boards in the Greater Toronto area. Over the course of his career, he has worked as a classroom teacher, special education teacher, special education consultant, and principal, with particular expertise in program development and system-level innovation. In addition to his school-based roles, Vince teaches special education and principal qualification courses and is a sought-after mentor for aspiring and newly appointed school leaders. Beyond the school building, he shares practical leadership and insights and education realities too, and a lot of heart on social media through The Friendly Principal. So you can find Vince at The Friendly Principal on Instagram, and his work centers on relationships, clarity, and human-centered leadership. So Vince, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Thanks for having me on. Nice to meet you too, Dave, and looking forward to chatting with you guys today.
And so I think it was really cool that we're able to collaborate on this, because it's always great to find somebody who's at the ground level, working with the students, working with the parents and the teachers, and can really illuminate what it is like working at the ground level, especially when it comes to mental health. As an educator, Vince, I know you wear many different hats, and you have to as a principal. So there's not just our show obviously focuses on mental health, but you've got to focus on the curriculum. You have to focus on the people above you and below you, and all these different directions and what their needs are. So, all of that, though, I do think impacts mental health. The greater the workload that you have, that your staff has, and whatever pressures the students are feeling nowadays, it impacts mental health. So I think there's this sort of overarching theme that mental health is always there. And yeah, we're going to have a discussion today on what you're seeing on the ground when it comes to children and mental health, and also educators and mental health.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just what I might see in my own building, but I mean, educators, principals, we all chat with each other. And so there's sort of a collective, a narrative that you start to piece together based on all the different things that you're hearing, whether it's your staff or whether it's students or even your parents, right? Because you'd be surprised. Parents sometimes come into the school and they're having their own struggles and they don't know who to turn to either. But the school sometimes is seen as a place where everybody can get some help. Everyone comes for maybe what they need. So it extends to the parent community as well, not just the staff and the kids.
I love this. I think this is, half of our mission is just demystifying things to the general public. So you being able to speak to the kind of the system that you work within, right? And so back and forth, what you're seeing, but also, how the system works or doesn't work, or, I know in Alberta, we went through a teacher strike, and everyone was ordered back to work from the government. And I do have teachers on my caseload, so I've heard from teachers, but from the admin perspective, in terms of managing, you're managing the school, the staff, the like from the top. And I don't think a lot of people understand exactly how that all works within the schools. They send their kids to school and they have a teacher, but they don't understand the whole structure of it. So I'm hoping you can shine some light on that too.
Yeah, sure. And I think too, administrators themselves are also having to make sure they're taking care of themselves too, because you can't pour from an empty vessel, right? So, in addition to making sure you're supporting your students, your parents, you need to take care of you too, right? To make sure you can be your best for the people who depend on you.
So, Vince, I'm wondering if you can shine a light a little bit on maybe in the last couple of years. I know that you're a principal for a school from kindergarten to grade 8.
Yep.
And so perhaps we can focus on that population a little bit more. And I just wonder, from a mental health perspective, I'm actually very interested in that middle school age, like the grade 6 to 8s, because that is like a time when students are starting to form their own, so to speak, right? That they're looking for that independence. They're sort of in that preteen stage. And I'm just wondering, for you and maybe other administrators who you've spoken to, what are some of the things that are really getting highlighted that's coming to the forefront when it comes to mental health and being able to push through adversity?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I should also say, like, I'm the parent of a child that's in that sort of age group too, right? So I'm starting to see some of those, challenges that kids might work through at that age, whether it's my own child who shares some things that they're going through and conversations at home, or even just hearing what they're describing from their peers. But I think, overall, there's a real struggle in that sort of that generally in that age of being able to be resilient and understanding how to be able to use a strategy or how to just regulate themselves so that they're not feeling overwhelmed or they're not sure how to work through a problem, because sometimes things that are quite small without good coping strategies or good ways to address it for yourself or knowing who to go to, little problems become much bigger, right? And then it becomes sort of that brick by brick by brick, and it becomes just too big and overwhelming, right? Like, I guess with respect to what's causing some of that, I think for me, what's been huge, especially since the pandemic, and sometimes I hate talking about the pandemic because I feel it becomes a scapegoat for all the issues of the world, right, at this time. But, I think one of the things that a lot of people did when the pandemic came around was throw themselves into social media and online communities, because that's where people found some connection. But that has also, I think, made it difficult for this age group and beyond, and younger for that matter, how to relate to people, like how to connect. And as a result, I think it's just exacerbated a lot of maybe the things that we used to be able to deal with a little bit easier before. Social media and the things it highlights and how people have lost the ability to engage with others in some ways, I think is making a lot of those problems a lot worse, harder to deal with for sure.
So if I'm hearing you, you're seeing trends of like students that are struggling to cope with adversity, like Andrew was saying, or challenges that might be quite small in some ways, but turn into really big emotional reactions.
Yeah.
And also seeing a trend of like increased social media and looking at potential causes from the social media use or the technology use in schools.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too that where we used to be able to, in an easier way, work through social challenges among peers through dialogue, through conversation, that some of that feels very much like a lost art. And so it's really incumbent on schools, and certainly it's been a focus at the school I work at and chatting with the staff, being able to really teach and model good problem solving skills, especially in social situations with the students. But also, even if it's not a social issue per se, and it's just something that they got to work through, helping them to be able to have almost like a systematic approach to understanding what the problem is, what really is the issue, how does it make you feel, what's within your circle of control, what do you need to ask for help with, and then really having the kids stop and think about what do they actually need to help them fix the problem, right? Because oftentimes they get wrapped up in the emotions of it that they can't think it through logically, like what actually would help me to fix this. So that's something that, in schools, in our school, in particular, but I know schools are really trying to do is to help give kids those strategies and problem solving strategies.
So that's really interesting, Vince, what you said right there. From a psychological perspective, you mentioned like the kids feel the feelings, but it's almost like they don't understand how to make sense of it, how to comprehend it, and what to do with it now. So I feel it. It could be sadness, it could be anger, it can be coming out in their behaviors as well, but they don't know what to do with it, is what I'm hearing.
Even things like anxiety, right? Like, when I think back to, growing up, I remember feeling anxiety a lot of times in high school, let's say, or even elementary school. And when I think back to what that looked like, I'll think, for an example, maybe I had a test coming up, and a little bit of anxiety when an assessment is coming up is actually okay, because now as I'm older and I can reflect on it better, I think to myself, it meant that I really cared about it and I wanted to do well. So that little bit of anxiety maybe helped me to prepare and get ready for something. But when the anxiety becomes so big and the kids don't know what to do with it, and it starts to impede their ability just to kind of function regularly, and now that test or that assignment or that tryout looks like such a huge thing in front of them, yeah, they might actually have great skill in that area and be able to do quite well, but now their feelings are prohibiting them from being able to go about it in a typical way, right?
Oh man, I'm listening and I'm just like I'm feeling for the teachers that you're talking about, because you're not even talking about the curriculum. You're not talking about the what they're, paid to teach the students, right? Like you're talking about yourself or the teachers being, psychologists or, mental health. Like how much of the time like how much training and how much time do you think like teachers are devoting to kind of just managing this aspect of the classroom versus being able to teach the content?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't be able to put a number on it, but I will say it's enough time that it's worth talking about a lot with the staff and with parents. I think especially those transition times in the day are times where we see it a lot, coming into school in the morning or coming back inside from a recess or after a lunch period or even before going outside, right? Like some kids struggle with knowing how to play outside or who they can go and play with, or what will I do if this happens outside. So those times of the day tend to be busier, and it's not uncommon to as I'm making my rounds in the building after those transition times or during those transition times, seeing teachers or support staff talking through something with a child in the hallway or a couple of kids together, or just as a whole class having to address the whole class and remind them that things are going to be okay in anticipation of what might be coming next in the day, right? So yeah, definitely it's something that staff are taking a lot of time doing. When you mention though, sort of that's not even the curriculum. For that reason, I think it's important for schools to remember ways to kind of build in that teaching of those strategies. How do you teach kids to be more resilient and make it part of the curriculum? I mean, there are places to be able to marry what is in the sort of the written curriculum with the unwritten curriculum, right? I would say some of that, working through those problems is the unwritten curriculum. There's places to be able to embed it, and then, another conversation is with staff around the fact that, well, I don't have time to do this because I have to get to math and I have to get to language. But the reality is that if we're not taking a more measured, intentional, and proactive approach where you say, I am going to dedicate some time to teaching this or going through these strategies, and maybe you can devote a small time of the day when things are calm, and maybe it's 10 or 15 minutes, that there is going to be a lot less time that you say you don't have versus the hour you might be spending later in the day having to work through something much bigger, right? So, that proactive approach of trying to be able to give kids those skills, I think in the long run is going to help with the worry that teachers have about, I can't cover something, I didn't get to something today, right?
How do you get everybody on board though? And this is where I really empathize with principals, because I know that you're juggling a lot, and this is just a snippet of what you have to do in your day. And so, you have other issues that will come up, and you might have staff who say, well, this was never something I signed up for, right? Dealing with student mental health. Like I signed up to teach math, I signed up to teach French, whatever. But dealing with a student who's struggling because of their mental health and, having such difficulties in my class because of mental health, like that's not for me.
Yeah.
Right. So as an administrator, and I know that you focus a lot on leadership and encouraging leadership and growth, how do you how do you help that staff? How do you help that teacher to say, hey, you know what? I know this is a very broad stroke question, but
Yeah.
how do you get them on board?
So what you've articulated is something that, and we probably many years ago, Andrew, sitting across the table from each other, we probably had this conversation at one point. Like, how do you get this, these other educators on board when they say, this is not my area of expertise, right? So my approach now, I think, first of all, I don't pretend to be an expert in mental health at all. It's not something that I have a real deep knowledge about. But one of the things that I certainly do feel that I've got good knowledge, and we all can have a lot of information about this, is just how to be a good human being, right? So the thing is this: I know that when educators go into this profession, they go into this vocation, I'll call it, because they want to have an impact and make a difference, and they're people who understand connection, right? And so, yeah, I have folks that say, oh, I'm not an expert on this. I don't think you need to be. You just have to be able to listen as best as you can and try to connect and empathize with what it is that those kids are showing us or telling us that they actually need, right? And sometimes a listening ear goes a long way in being able to help solve a problem. And if you don't have the solution, the beautiful thing about education is that there are other people around that can support us, right? You've got staff in the school, guidance counselors and social workers or child and youth workers. You have school psychologists. Sometimes we connect even with the people outside the school, people like yourselves, like third-party people that are connected to families, or we can refer families to, or, come into the school and partner with us. So we don't have to be the experts in having all the solutions, but we have the ability to listen and try to understand what it is that, the kids are going through. That tends to get quite a lot of people on board, because they want to help, right? They really do want to help genuinely. But I think sometimes the reservation is the worry that in trying to help, you're actually going to do something wrong because you don't know, right? And that's a fear that I think a lot of people have, is doing the wrong thing trying to help. So it's also trying to encourage people to understand that you're never going to do something wrong just by listening and trying to understand what the issue is, right?
Yeah, I'm hearing that, like, get something wrong, but I'm also hearing like, I don't have time, or like, I can only do so much, and now I'm being asked to do more, right? With these students that, and maybe you can speak to this, because my oldest son has a diagnosis and has an IPP, is what they call it in Alberta, right? Like an individualized plan for his education. And when you mentioned transitions, I was like, yeah, that's part of it, right? Like those are tough times for my son, right? And so sometimes it means like specific strategies for how to get his winter clothes on to get outside for the recess, and how to get him back inside after recess when the teacher isn't there, right? And it's someone else supervising the playground. So I guess I'm curious, from your end, you said you've seen the trend of like increasing in some areas. Do you see more individualized plans for students that teachers are also needing to adhere to and even create for the students? Has that been a
Yeah,
trend? Yeah.
absolutely. So, I kind of mentioned a little bit ago having that sort of whole school approach where, you try to support students by maybe designating some time every day in classes where, you're focusing on strategies. Let's say they're, could be good for everybody. But yeah, there is an increase too in some kids who need a little more than, your generic or your general kind of strategies that anyone can kind of just pull and try in the moment. So in those situations, and had this not long ago, it's a pretty regular thing. At that point, it's a team approach, right? You bring parents to the table, you bring staff to the table. If there are, like a social worker or something that's connected to the family, or that you connect the family to a mental health worker, or there's a third party that's working with the family, you try to bring everybody together and really understand what everyone can kind of do collectively to support the student. I think it's really important. Andrew, you mentioned sort of, middle-aged, older student. I think as the kids get older, especially, it's so important to include them in that conversation, because sometimes, when we create these IPPs or IEPs, we or these individual plans, we start throwing in all the strategies that we think are going to work. But the reality is that, if they're not going to work for the person who they're intended for, then it's just word salad, right? So it's important to get, the input of the student in and ask them what they feel would actually help them. And if they don't know what would help them, then that goes back again to the education piece, to say, well, you know what, let's try these things and let's see how they go. And we come back together in a little while and see how they're working for you, right? And if they're working well, then we continue. And if they're not, then we can look at something else, right? I think one of the hard things around that sort of team approach, or involving educators and other folks in those discussions about what might work for a student, is and I literally, this was the conversation I had yesterday with someone, was if I break a coffee mug, right, I can take the coffee mug and I can stick the handle back on with some Gorilla Glue, and it was a one-time action and I fixed the mug. But not everything can be fixed with Gorilla Glue on one time, right? So some of those strategies and those approaches are going to take time to actually practice them and talk through them. Or maybe, you set up a safe space and a safe person for someone, and then scheduling wise, it doesn't quite work, right? So you come back to the table again and you say, okay, how can we adjust this so that, the student has access to who and what they need and when they need it. So that team approach is really important. And, as the leader in the school, you're going to be the person who's sort of overseeing the implementation of that plan. So it's important to keep communication open, bring people together, and empower the staff to make them feel like they actually can do those things to support that student too, right?
Vince, that's a really good point. As you were saying, like the Gorilla Glue example and persistence of the staff and the school to help. I think that I guess my role back in the school board, just going to so many different schools. The best schools in terms of servicing students were the ones where through leadership, there was follow through, there was resilience on leadership's end to say, hey, something happened. I'm going to reach out to Andrew. I'm going to reach out to the team and ask for suggestions. Or I'm going to bring the team back together and let's brainstorm some more. Versus schools where it was like you go there, you provide a strategy, and then they say, didn't work.
Yeah.
And then something blows up. Then they come back and say, hey, a month ago you gave us a strategy. It never worked. And this has been happening for the last 4 weeks at the school. It's like, well, why was there never any follow-up? Right? Like, come on, guys. Yeah. But I think what you speak to, Vince, is resilience at the system level, not just on the individual level. So we've spoken, like you talked earlier about students being resilient. I think the system needs to be resilient. And whoever is the leader of that school, or even broader than the school, maybe at the board level, is how are we continuing to follow up and making sure that the people running the school, that the staff at the school are well taken care of in terms of their resilience, in terms of their mental health. Yeah. And staff being able to openly share, hey, something's not working here. I know I've met with you 3 times. I'm so sorry, to have to meet with you again, but can I get some help? And it's not, going, oh my gosh, like, why can't you get this done? It's actually supporting them.
Yeah. And so you just, as you're speaking, like, I just had like 10 different like brain bursts of different things I wanted
That's
to
usually
address.
What happens with us, man.
Just that, right? So, okay. So maybe I'll try to work backwards a little bit, what I remember most recently, what you just said. Okay. So I think like school leaders need to make sure that they cultivate the relationship with their staff, that their staff can come to them when there's a problem and not feel that when they come to you and speak to you about something, that it's judgment and blame, right? Because if staff feel that way, then I think, Andrew, like that's where what you described sometimes can happen, right? I tried something, it didn't work, but I don't have the relationship to go back to my school leader or my team and say, I tried this, it didn't work, because I'm fearful of being judged, because they're going to think it's my fault it didn't work. I did something wrong if it didn't happen, right? So I don't have that open conversation with you. And so we're just going to abort mission, and in 4 weeks, we'll come back and tell you it didn't work, right? So I think it's important to make sure that school leaders remain open and help their staff really understand that you are there to hear them out and support them so that they can do the important work that they're going to do with the student, right? Like as the principal of the school, like I have this, this amazing opportunity to have influence in a lot of different areas. But the reality is that the classroom teachers and support staff are those people that are working most directly with the students and are going to be implementing and doing the actual work, right? So if they can't come to me and tell me something's not working, or I need help with this, or I'm missing this in order to do this effectively or well, if they can't do that, then you can put whatever you want on paper. Nothing's going to happen, right? The plan just doesn't lift if you don't have the people that can do it. And the leader needs to set the tone and be available to make sure that they're there to support that, right? So I think, though, where leaders maybe get stuck in that a little bit is that they themselves get really bogged down and don't have what they need to be able to be that kind of person, right? So when I think about the system, I really think it's the people, right? It's the people that are working together. And it's so important that we are available to each other, that we're listening to one another, that we're being open, that we're not passing judgment, and that, if I think about conversations I have, yeah, sometimes I might hear something that might elicit an emotional response, but I have to make sure that, I sit with that for a minute and, then come back and deal with the issue or support in a more logical, like, systematic way rather than give an emotional response, right? Because that's going to turn people off. So yeah, basically it needs to be that school leaders are remaining human, being human first, because that will help to be able to move everything along, if that makes sense. It seems like a pretty simple thing, but it's super hard to do sometimes because I think to lead in a school, you have to really know yourself too. You have to be really self-reflective and be strong in what your values are, know who you are, and stick to those things. So easier said than done.
You know what's so interesting, Vince, is that the school culture. I remember, again, just going to so many different schools, you could get a sense walking into a school. It was like a sixth sense that, what is the culture here like? And as you were saying, what you were saying, Vince, I had like the complete opposite memory of like a school that would cultivate a very positive, resilient culture. I remember, and I'm not afraid to say this because I'm not going to identify anyone, but it's a story, a high school where I was servicing, and multiple times in the office, and this is a high school office, so you've got like three different to four different admins, and the staff out front doing the admin work, and this principal would just ream out staff in closed doors, behind closed doors, but you can hear it outside. Yeah. Just reaming out staff on occasion. And like that school, I was there for so many years, and you could just feel the culture change. It used to be a school where it was really open. People enjoyed going to work. People smiled, to one of like fear. And people would come up to me when I was there once a week and say, Andrew, can I talk to you about something? Because I don't feel safe going to my principal. That was the culture.
I agree with you. Like the minute you walk in the building, you should know right away what it's all about, just from the foyer. And just yesterday, actually, I met with a family that was registering at my school. They're coming from somewhere else, and they're like, oh, I just wanted to know what the school's all about. And we actually met in the foyer, and I said, well, you tell me. You've been here now for 5-10 minutes speaking in the hallway. What do you think? And they're like, no, we can tell it's a really nice place, that we've done our job, right? If you can tell that from walking in right away, then that's great. Yeah, when I hear stories like that where, there's been an administrator or whatever that's been really upset and you hear yelling behind a closed door, what I think about when I hear stuff like that is how many turns of the wheel it's going to take now to turn that ship around in terms of the culture and set it back on the right path, right? Like it takes 10,000 steps in the right direction to make the culture, good and welcoming. And one thing can completely erase all of that, and it makes me sad to hear that would be something that would happen. But then I also think to myself, man, what's going on for that leader that was the response that they felt they had to have in that moment, right? Like, are they struggling with something too? So, yeah.
That person's a character.
What's that?
That person's a character. We'll talk after.
So it's striking to me because Vince, you're talking about kind of leadership and how that, trickles down to the entire school and the culture of the school. But it's so obvious the way that you are talking about this, that you are not just talking about it, you're modeling it. Like when the staff is coming to you, you are taking the minute to think about it and to problem solve and to manage your own emotions that might come up. And so being able to not only talk about something, but to model it to the staff and then hope that the staff can then respond to the students in the same way, I think is so huge that we haven't really like named that, but it's so obvious by listening to you.
Yeah, I think modeling is, principals traditionally are like, the lead instructor of the school, right? Like that's what principals were supposed to be many years ago when principals were a thing or started becoming a thing, I guess, right? So for me, I take very seriously my role in also trying to be the lead instructor for the staff in not just curriculum matters, but how to deal with, or work through situations, right? And so when a student might come to me with an issue, or a teacher comes to me with a student, and I'm speaking to the student, I do try always to be mindful that not only is this an opportunity to support the student, but it's also a chance for me to provide some coaching for the staff, not by having an explicit conversation about how to do this, but by virtue of the staff watching the way that I will support the student. And look, I'm a human being, so there are times where I fail too, right? Like, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect thing all the time. But the idea is that you always go into every situation, wanting to always support that student, make sure that they have what they need, and use that opportunity also to give the staff some learning about how to assist and support as well, right? Especially like, we talked about before, teachers or support staff saying, I'm not an expert in this. I don't know how to handle it. Well, here, let me show you. Let me give you some words until you have your own, right? Let me try to show you how I might handle the situation or work through this with the students, that, should you be faced with something similar in the future, or the student comes to you tomorrow and feeling this way, you have something to use in your toolkit to support them.
You know what I always found really helpful, and you just reminded me of that, is when staff see that you are willing to sit down with them, or better yet, sit in a meeting with them, with a parent or with a student. I know that it takes time for us to do that, but whenever we offer that, you can just see the nervousness or the discomfort the staff would have just sort of melt away. It's like, you know what? You've got this high stakes parent meeting. I'll be there as well. I'll come out to you, and we'll all sit together. It's like that anxiety just sort of melts away. And I think this is where educators feel supported and feel like, okay, somebody is going to be there for me too. So I think as you were talking about that, Vince, like being human, being kind, being supportive, like all of that it's like making time for other people, and people recognize that you're taking time for them.
I say to my staff often, and to when I sort of teach some of the leadership classes or principal qualifications courses, I'm like, the shepherd must smell like their flock, right? So you've got to be out there. You need to be with, your students. You need to be with your staff. They need to know you. You need to know them. Whether you're in a little teeny tiny school or you're in a big school, it makes a difference. I never ever want my staff or my students or my parents, for that matter, to see me as the school leader who, sits behind the desk, behind a screen, clacking away at keys on, a keyboard, or he's just the guy that sends the emails, right? Like, it's just, leadership and school leadership in 2026, I think, needs to be as dynamic as our schools are. You need to be visible. You have to be out there. You have to know your people. And if you know your people, that puts you in the best position, or a better position anyway, to be able to support them, right? You can't support people that you don't know and understand. So really taking the time to do that is so important, right? And just being with people, listening to them and talking to them, knowing them I think pays huge dividends in being able to do the job well.
It's the EQ of the job. It's not the IQ of the job. It's the EQ, right? You have to understand the emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, school leadership, I think, is you're working with personalities all day, right? And understanding how to, approach people in different ways that you're going to most be able to speak to them, right? And sometimes even the way you're going to work through challenges with kids or with staff or with parents, you can't take the same approach. I know sometimes, especially, I don't know, I find in education, we always worry about setting precedents. I don't worry about setting precedents. You do what you need to do in that moment, because that's what works. Maybe I handled it this way for someone, last week, and here's a very similar situation, but we're not taking that approach. We're taking this one. Well, why are you doing it that way? Because that's what works here. And, and here's why, and on that note, I think too, like, that whole idea of building these trusting human relationships is also to, as much as you can be, to be transparent with why you're doing what you're doing. Let people in on that, because that builds trust, right? And having good trusting relationships, I think, also is good for the culture and the mental health of the school and everybody that works in it or comes there too, right? So
I love that transparency, and I'm not sure that everyone is on the same page with that. And I say that because my experience with, actually, my master's training was in Ontario, and I was with a school board doing psychoed assessments and counseling within the school. And then, from my teaching experience, my teaching education, and being in the staff room, when I was a student teacher, and then now having my son or both my boys in school, we went to a pre-meeting before the school started about the IPP for my son.
Mhm.
And it's great because the principal's there, the principal, the VP, like, we had everyone kind of sitting around the table and going, okay, here's the plan, here's what we're doing. Awesome. But I ask about EA support and I see all the eyes get big, right? And nobody's saying it. And then eventually the principal's like, well, we have one EA for the entire school, and this is a K-9 school. And we have another position available. It's open, but no one has filled it. Like, we just can't find the staff to actually fill the position that we have funding for, right? But nobody's really talking about that, right? So it's like, yes, my son has some funding attached to him being at the school and likely should have some additional support. But if that support isn't even available, even if everyone sitting around the table thinks it's a great idea, like, that transparency. And then, I could see parents that don't have the same kind of inside knowledge walk away going like, I don't know why my kid's not getting what they need, right? It's like, well, it's not the principal's fault. It's not the teacher's fault. It's not, like, these are system kind of limitations. So yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just venting about this, but I don't want to put you in a hard spot to, but I think this is a time to educate the public a little bit around some of the limitations that you are faced with within your leadership.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all on that. I mean, look, there are some things that are just outside of the circle of control, let's say, of the principal in a school, right? School districts are dealing with, all kinds of different pressures. And then, staffing certainly is one of them, right? Whether it's because you can't find good people or whether they're budgetary issues. I can't control those at a school level. What I can control at the school, though, is, again, bringing those people in who have those questions and giving them the most open, honest answer that I can about what the challenge is that's before us. But I also don't throw my hands up in the air and say, sorry, because of that, we can't help you, right? I think schools are always in a position to help. It may not be the help that people exactly envision or want. Sometimes in those situations, in addition to, again, sharing as much as I can about the reality of what we're dealing with in school, I will ask parents why. Why is what you're asking for important to you? Because maybe I can't solve that problem for you exactly the way you want me to, but if I know the why, then I might be able to work alongside the staff here and yourself as parents to be able to come up with another solution that still gets us to what we need to eventually, like in the end, for the student. And you got to be really creative. This is the time of the year now where families start registering for September. And so, I get phone calls from parents of children who have special needs and maybe asking about what supports are available. And it's difficult for me to project, from January or February to, September. And that's hard for parents because they're anxious about sending their kids to school. They want to know right now. But I think in those situations, you try to reassure folks as much as you can that, you love the children, you want them to do well, you want to give them everything they can, and that you'll sit down at the table with them and you'll do the very best you can together to come up with what will best serve the student.
I'm going to pivot just a tiny bit here. Maybe it's a lot, not a tiny bit. But you brought up very early in our conversation about phones.
Yep.
And I sort of wanted to get your take on the ground level. So for those who don't know, I mean, in Ontario, there was a lot of lip service. I call it lip service, that, no phones in the classroom. But guess what? Like, I hear all the time, like, there's still phones in the classroom. And again, we're probably talking a little bit about the older grades. But, kids nowadays, like, they can easily have a phone, grade 6, right? Maybe even earlier for some.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, again, being at the ground level, what are you seeing? Like, is phones as bad as some parents may see them to be? Is it leading to more bullying, at least anecdotally? And is it a cause for that, as much concern as some professionals or parents think that it is?
Well, I think I'll start off by saying that, certainly the, cell phones and tablets and such in the classroom, can be leveraged to be incredible learning tools. Like, I've got kids at my school right now that are using personal devices, and they're using them to be able to make, videos, video editing and such, which, it's really great stuff to see what they're creating. So from a learning perspective, can't say enough good things about what tech can do. I think that phones have certainly complicated, made more complex, maybe some social and peer issues that at this age group have always kind of existed. It just adds another layer of complexity, because sometimes what we hear from students when something has gone down, involving cell phones. Well, it happened on the weekend and it happened after hours, and so it's not the school's problem. No, it absolutely is the school's problem, because if you're coming to school on Monday and, so-and-so is in the washroom crying and it can't get them out of the stall because they're upset about what, was said online about them, and they're embarrassed to come and face their peers at school today, now it's a school issue and we have to deal with it, right? I think that it's sometimes difficult to be able to enforce some of it, even though there are policies, and procedures around how to deal with these situations. So for me, I'm a teacher first. I really try to focus, and the staff at the schools I've worked in have also taken a similar approach, is to focus on the education piece and really help students understand, how to use these as, a device to support learning and such. And yes, they're great devices for entertainment and connecting with people, but what are the dangers that can come, with anything? Any tool can be dangerous, right? And so how does this very powerful thing that you keep in your back pocket, or clip to your pants or wherever, how can this become a big problem for you? So the education piece, I think, is really important. Do we limit it at the school? No, not entirely. I mean, again, the rule at our school really is it's under the guidance of the staff when you're allowed to use them. And I have to say, because we've really spent a lot of time educating the kids, I'll have kids sometimes come up to me and say, Mr. Galea, I need to call home. Can I use my cell phone? So they're asking to use it. So that tells me that there is respect for, the rules that exist, and maybe they're understanding why it's so important. Does it still happen from time to time? Yeah, it does. And you have to deal with those. And sometimes there are consequences attached. But even when there are consequences, the focus is on educating.
I think, though, it goes back to the culture, right? What we had talked about almost throughout this entire episode is that culture that you provide or curate at the school, that, there's a sense of respect. Like, I'm not going to say you cannot use your phone, even though the higher powers might be like, nobody can use their phones in the school. But it's not necessarily saying, well, because someone said so, we cannot use it. Like, there has to be reason behind it, right? There's got to be some logical reasoning to say, well, hey, look, a phone can be a very good educational tool. Just because someone said that we can't ever pull out our phones, hey, here's an opportunity from an education perspective to take a video, to make a movie. Let's get creative in terms of your education. And I think if you provide that culture where you're like, hey, I'm not going to say no to everything, I think that's where you get students who will say, hey, you know what? I know this is the rule. I don't mean to break it, but can I use my phone?
Yeah, you said something important, which was, that whole idea of respecting the rules and helping them understand why. Because at this age group, just telling them what the rules are is not going to get compliance. They're all about why. But why? Why can't I? How come? Right? So it's important to explain the rationale, and also explain to them sometimes giving them some sense of what could happen if we're not making good decisions for ourselves and for others. What could be the result of that? And why does that get messy? And how does that impact you? How does it impact other people, right? So adults are the same way. I don't even know adults that love following rules without an understanding of why, right? So treat kids like adults and give them sort of information so that they can make, good decisions with information, right? I don't love rules either, I'll be honest with you, especially if they're not enforceable, right? So, who doesn't have a cell phone in their pocket these days? Everybody. And kids look at adults, and adults are constantly walking around with them in their hands. So then they say, well, why can't I do that? Right? You're telling me that there's going to be all these problems. I don't see my parents have problems with their cell phone in their hand all the time, right? So why would that happen to me? So, and then I would also say, for any parents that are listening too, please, when it comes to expectations that the schools share, we're not about making rules just for the sake of making rules. The rules exist because something somewhere has happened, and we're honestly wanting to keep kids safe, right? So, if the school is saying, no cell phones, for example, and if you need to contact your child, call the school. We'll get them for you. Like, we'll make sure you can speak to your child in the day if you need to. Please don't text your child in the middle of the day and put them in a situation where now they're having to pull out their phone, right? Like, we really want to work together, in the same way that when a child comes to school and says, my mom or dad says that I can't do this, we respect that. We're like, well, that's what mom and dad say, then we're gonna help with making sure we enforce that too for you, right? So it's a partnership, right, with anything.
This is great. I mean, I think we just released one episode on culture, but like culture and respect and all of these things, like even the culture within the school. If the culture outside of the school doesn't support the culture in, or vice versa, right? Like, what is respect? Is it disrespectful to look at your phone when someone else is talking? Like, is that changing? Or I mean, I'm getting a bit older, but like we talk about kids nowadays, right? I heard Andrew say that. And it's like, okay, so what are the actual differences, right? Of like, I remember we had Mac computers brought to the school and we had computer class where everyone went down to the computers and then we went back to our classroom, right? There was no technology in the classrooms. Now we have smart boards and Apple watches and, these glasses that are recording it. Like, so when does this like interfere with the learning and when does this support the learning? I think we're navigating this and you're on the forefront of this, right? Like, I know at our school with my son, the new rule is no phones, right? And it's a hard rule. And the book that everyone was reading was The Anxious Generation, and these movements in even Australia with banning social media for kids. Like, we're trying to figure this out as a society, not only like as a school, but this is a broader issue that I think. Again, you come from a place of leadership and you're going to be educating as much as like listening to what is happening out there. So hats off to you.
Thanks. I think you have to be, on whether in this issue too, I think there's a lot of gray. Like, I think people try to make it black and white, but with most things, you have to be able to sort of be comfortable to some extent in the gray, right? And being able to provide, the rationale, the leadership in those times where things might get a bit murky, yeah, you got to be okay to be in the gray would be the message I would say about that, and it takes good relationships, cultivating good relationships to be able to help people understand what's okay and not okay and why. And, look, when it comes to cell phones, we're not fighting it. Like, they're here, they're everywhere. So we created a ban. I mean, I don't know much about the ban in Australia that they put together now. And to be honest with you, if I'm going to be really honest, I haven't spent the time looking into it because in the back of my mind, don't believe it's really going to work, right? Like, how are you, unless you got like, I don't know, is it like a system ban? Are they like just shutting down networks? How are you going to ban it?
Right? They're requiring the social media companies or apps to create, they've kind of tasked them to be able to create a system where children under a certain age can't access it. But I was just listening to something not that long ago, or last week or the week before. It was like all the kids talking about how they're getting around the rules, right? Yeah. Like how they make their face look older than what they actually are. Like, so it's this chicken and egg, right? Like, we're kind of chasing things. And I like what you said about like, I don't like rules that I can't enforce. So this might fall into that category, right? Like, if we say no, but we can't enforce it, then what's the point of saying no, right?
Yeah, my bold prediction for 2026 is that they're going to find a way to work around it. Period. Like, if they want to be on it, they will find the workaround because they are smarter than us. Kids are smarter than us. They're ahead of us in terms of sort of, their understanding of how to work around these technologies. Like I mentioned to you guys at some point earlier when we were just, saying hello, I've now gone into that cringy dad phase where, I don't have the expert, like the knowledge about some of these things that my kids have, and they're schooling me, and I need them to school me because I'm leading a school. And, I have all those apps on my phone, not because I, go around Snapchatting myself, but because I need to understand how to use it so that if I have an issue at the school, I can kind of work through it and I understand what the ins and outs of the app are, right? So, and I still can't keep up. The kids are on different apps all the time and I hear them talking about it on the playground and I go up to them and say, hey, what is that? Tell me what you do with that. How do you use it? And I'll even say, do you have your cell phone in your pocket? Yeah, I'm going to give you permission. Take it out. Can you show me? And they will. They want to help educate and bring me in on it too. Even though what they don't know is that my learning it helps me to make sure that I keep them safe too in some ways, right? So, they're helping me catch them maybe down the road later. I love
working with the students who will tell me, hey, I spent 3 hours last night and trying to figure out how to circumvent stuff at the school. And it's like, I love your intelligence, your cleverness. But man, if you just spent half the time of that studying for your physics test today, like, you could have done really well.
Right, exactly.
But they're resourceful, right? Kids are resourceful. And if they really want to know something, they really want to figure something out, they'll figure it out, man. Like,
It makes me think about one day I had some students working in my office, and they were working on a project, and I said they could stay with me and work on it. So they were working at a conference table, and they heard me chatting with our office admin, our school secretary, and I was chatting about the fact that I had to quickly bang out a letter for the parents about something that was coming up. I'm just going to throw the details in Chat GPT and get a letter going so I can just and the kids turned and they're like, what? You use Chat GPT, right? Because what do they hear from their teachers? Oh, don't use Chat GPT. You're cheating. And I'm like, well, yeah, but here's how I'm using it. I'm using it as a tool to help me with this and this. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So you're not just copy pasting what Chat GPT gave them. Like, no, I'm not. But here's where it's a time saver. It's a tool for me, right? So, I think anytime you can, for kids, again, use anything as a teachable moment, and help them understand how they can leverage a new technology to help them in some way, it's a good thing, right?
there's some teacher in your school, Vince, who's going, that student just said that Mr. Galea uses ChatGPT.
100%.
But this is how it works, right? Like I think with kids or teenagers, I love meeting with teenagers, and I'm learning all the time because the culture is changing, right? And
Yeah.
so they'll talk about talking with someone, and I'm like, have you met this person? Well, no, it's all we're chatting. Oh, so you're like texting each other. You're not actually talking like with your mouth. Like you're
Right.
not. So just even that those social interactions are changing, right? And how do we keep up with it? Not like I got one eye like looking at my kids going like, what do I need to be prepared for, right? Because
Yeah.
this world is different than the world that I grew up in. And I think that's what I hear from you is you're curious and you're going to pay attention to what's happening so that you can also help keep kids safe and educate kids and have their best interest in mind too.
And that would be my advice to parents too, right? Like, just say when your children come home and they talk to you about something, or if they're not talking to you, then they're talking to somebody else, right? And then what are you hearing? And how can you kind of get in on that? Because I think that parents have an important role in being able to, I mean, they're the children's first educator and the most important one for sure. And I think that the more that they can stay on top of kind of what's happening in their children's lives, and work through some of the challenges that their children are experiencing, and give them tips on how they can deal with things, right? The one caution I would make around that is that sometimes the way parents might, I'm a parent myself, right? So I've got two kids, and sometimes I give them horrible advice, right? Because what I think might work for my own two kids at home isn't going to work in a school where there's 400 kids, right? So it doesn't always transfer the same way, but it's so important for parents to be, as informed as they can be involved in their kids' lives. And I know that seems like a, simple thing to understand, but parents are busy. Like, parents are so busy, and it's difficult to be able to stay on top of what's happening, all the changes. What I learned today, tomorrow's already something different, right? But it really does help home and school to be able to work together, to raise good, resilient kids.
Vince, this was really a pleasure. That last comment, I think, raising resilient children, there's many ways to do it. And I think through our discussion today, this is one way. But also I think what we've really stressed in this conversation is the system that's there to support the children. No one child, parent, teacher, educator is on their own, hopefully, and that there is a system. It requires, leadership to be there, to be open and engaged. And it also requires people at the ground level, the educators, the parents, the students to also be open to asking for help, right? I think put those two things together and you can have a very positive culture, one that is going to be very beneficial for the child going through the education system.
It's a very powerful thing when the kids know that the school and their parents are working together. And when one side or the other is struggling, the kids feel it, right? So it's very important that that connection between home and school is there. And that, like you said, Andrew, that if there is a need on the school side or the parent side, that there's those conversations so that we can help each other.
Absolutely. So, Vince, thank you for being on Taking Good Care today. It was a great conversation, and it was just really nice to have an educator, a principal speaking from the ground level and just having a discussion on what you're seeing. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great to chat with both of you. Thanks so much.
Awesome. And if you want to find Vince Galea, he is at the Friendly Principal on Instagram, and he puts out great videos, lots of snippets, a lot of pointers for educators and parents. And so go check him out.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.
I'm leaving this with a lot of appreciation and optimism, actually. So I appreciate your humility, and I can see the way you steer the ship and the way you're leading and leading by example. So really nice meeting you today. It's awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Likewise.
All right. And if you've enjoyed this episode today, give us a like, follow us, ask us questions, leave us comments. We always love that. And until the next episode, take good care.